I'm going to burn at least one of my precious minutes. So please, everybody stand up. Up we jump, up we jump. This is the 7th inning stretch. You guys are way more durable than I am. I have about 3 talks in me, and then I just implode. Okay, so we're going to do 3 reps of a super quick end-to-end stretch. First is ass in the grass. Get down low, sink into your haunches. Bonus points for actually putting your elbows between your knees and applying all that happy traction. Open up your hip flexors, which we have just been massacring, and then reach for the sky. Back down again, one more. Open it up, stretch your spine, reach for the sky. Last one, down we go. This is just awesome, seeing humans moving. Thank you. And one more. I lied, that wasn't my only request. Please take out your phones. Please, everybody, take out your phone. Hold them high, hold them high. Yes, yes, where are they? Now put those sons of bitches on airplane mode. Here we go. There's nothing I'm going to say in the next 15 minutes, actually 14 minutes, that can't be shareable, tweetable later. We are, as the InstaSnap generation says, IRL in this beautiful room together, so let's do it. All right, that said, I will whip out my other device. And we're here to talk today a little bit about the possibilities, not so much of the allopathic, not so much of what's wrong, but what can be right. But before we do that, we're going to need to actually dive a little deeper into the what's wrong. So first, a little bit, not of the ecstasy, but the agony. And the high-level overview of what I'd like to talk about, it's going to answer first, is the idea that paradoxically, we do, as Peter and my partner Stephen wrote about in Bold and Abundance, we are paradoxically living in the best of times, and yet somehow we are sort of internally and subjectively living in the worst of times, and it is literally destroying our world. And part of that could be, at least the hypothesis for this talk and our work, is that in fact we are overclocking our processors. We are trying to cram too much information down too skinny pipes, and it's creating a world of hurt. And if we engage our lived experience and our vitality and our health, healing, and work in the world, not just from our psychology, but from our integrated neurophysiology, we can get a lot more done. It is, as Archimedes once said, the longer lever. And finally, the idea here is that if we can do these things, there is a world of hurt. There is a world of challenge. There is a world of opportunity waiting for us to get this right. So how many of you came across this book or at least heard it talked about in the chattering classes in the blogosphere? Yeah, so this was Hillbilly Elegy. J.D. Vance was born and raised in rural Appalachia in Ohio. He then his get out of Dodge ticket was to join the Marine Corps. From that, he parlayed that into acceptance into Yale Law School, and then came out with this book right around the time the world lurched off its axis about 18 months ago, and everyone said, what on earth happened? What has just happened? And so this book kind of rocketed to the front to discuss the fact that the traditional American white blue-collar working class have sort of missed the promise of the post-NAFTA globalization, right, and sort of shiny, happy people, right? And at roughly the same time, there was a Princeton study that was talking about, fundamentally, diseases of despair. The idea that if you were particularly a white male over the age of 40 without a college degree, for the first generation in kind of trackable history, 20th and 21st centuries, your prospects were getting worse. And this became really kind of a clarion call in the last 12 months as to what might not be working anymore with the American project. And certainly you can think of poor extractive resource economies, mining, logging, et cetera, and how the world has literally kind of developed around a lot of those former communities and how hard that would be. But this is not isolated to rural Appalachia. In fact, the World Health Organization, just a couple of years ago, released a report that for the first time, suicides actually outpace not just wars, but wars and homicides or wars and natural disasters combined. That more people are choosing to end their own lives than the largest, most violent acts of God, right? Flood, plague, famine, fire, plus the gods of war. So think about that. We have now officially become our own worst enemies. And that's tragic, that there are more people on this planet choosing to exit the mortal coil than show up and live a life fully expressed, that show up and contribute to what's possible and what's next. And if you look at on the left-hand bottom of that little infograph, it says 75% of those suicides are occurring fundamentally in the less prosperous nations. And if you combine that with the hillbilly elegy stats, the diseases of despair, we can think, oh, well, maybe it's because people are getting bypassed, the increasing separation of wealth, essentially the folks that are being left behind are suffering acutely. And that is absolutely true, but it is in no way the whole picture. Because just a few miles down the street from Singularity's campus is Palo Alto. And in Palo Alto, they had an emergency gathering of their city council because, tragically, a number of their top students at Palo Alto High School, right? So to put this in context, this is Silicon Valley. This is where median home prices are well into 7 figures for little 60s suburban shacks, right? This is where this is Lake Wobegon, and all the children are above average. And they have had to privately hire crossing guards to monitor the train tracks so that more of their children cannot and will not step in front of them. After a bad SAT, after blowing a perfect 4.0, after not having the chance to go to the university that both of their parents went to. So this is not simply about socioeconomics. This is not simply about haves and have-nots. This is pervasive, persistent, and chronic. But what if this whole notion of diseases of despair is a misnomer? What if they're not diseases at all? What if they're symptoms? What if they're symptoms of a much larger, more insidious malaise? And anthropologists have a term for different states of consciousness, and they categorize societies by which how many states of consciousness are acculturated, understood, accessible, and integrated. And the fancy terms is monophasic or polyphasic. So most indigenous cultures are polyphasic cultures, meaning if you have dreams, if you have premonitions, if you have trances, if you have any other kind of non-ordinary state of consciousness, they are welcomed, embraced, accepted. There's context for them. If someone comes down the stairs in the morning in a rural village in Mexico and says, I dreamt of grandfather, right, grandmother is not going to dismiss it and just say, eat your Wheaties. She's going to say, oh, well, what did he have to say? There's a communication, there's a validity to that information feed. Post-French Enlightenment, the developed West, Western Europe, and then the United States, created a very narrowly focused, empirically driven, monophasic culture, which gave us, like any focusing engine, whether a laser or a magnifying glass, created great power. It gave us the scientific revolution. It gave us civil rights and democratic free market societies. It gave us a whole lot of invaluable things. But the dial on the radio got fused, got frozen, got locked. And where it left us was with one little channel of perception and neurophysiological calibration, right, at a time when the world's data feed, when the pipes just got turned wide open. So we are trying to live life on dial-up while the world has just kicked in to sort of quantum fiber optic. Right, Eric Schmidt said a couple of years ago, he said basically from the dawn of humankind until 2007, right, that amount of bits of information are now generated every 2 days. If you've ever just sat down on a Sunday morning with a cup of coffee and read the New York Times Sunday edition, you have consumed in that blissful hour, without kids or phones, right, you've consumed more information than a medieval monk did in their entire lives. So these diseases of despair, right, we say with actually their symptoms, the symptom could be, hypothesis, that in fact we are actually killing ourselves from information overload, information overwhelm, and that we are all suffering persistent and chronic post-traumatic stress. We literally don't know whether to shit or go blind. So that's the sort of public health approach to this side of the fence. We took a look at it in the researching and writing of Stealing Fire from the other side, which was saying, hey, if this is true, how true would it be? Not just from stats and World Health Organization and academics, but does it show up in the market at all? Is there a there? And what we used was a kind of a lens, and we said, how badly, how desperately are people trying to change that channel? Right? If there's a pain point here, surely this should show up in the economics. And we used this as our basic filter, and we said, hey, any categories of things that people are using to try and change that channel, to try and get out of their heads into some altered or different state, right, would reliably count in this tally. And long story short, there's 15,000 words and notes if anybody's really curious, but long story short, we added it up and we were really conservative. We didn't update from older studies to 2017 dollars. If it was a US number or tally, we didn't extrapolate around the world because different cultures have different adoption rates, so we were really low on this. It's $4 trillion. That's a quarter of the US GDP. To put it in perspective, nearly 15 years of a dual front war in Afghanistan and Iraq cost $5 trillion. We're spending $4 trillion every year. Now, not all of it's productive. Some of it's destructive, addictive, distractive. But we are spending $4 trillion to try and change that channel. So as we kind of assembled all of the research, we sort of created accidentally, but quite powerfully, what is amounted to the Rosetta Stone of non-ordinary states. And if you look over on the left-hand side, that is more or less 21st century normal. Tired, wired, and stressed, not particularly resourceful. Over on this side is where things get super interesting. Right? So 21st century normal would be beta wave activity, norepinephrine and cortisol, and a kind of persistent drip stress profile, catabolic cardiac states, slump posture, poor respiration, bad air exchange, relentless inner critic, a whole very consistent set of protocols or experiences. The right-hand side is where resilience, where trauma healing, where innovation and creativity happen. So you take that two-dimensional matrix, you put it into gear over time, and it starts looking a little bit like this, which is more of a cycle. And what we realize is that people in perpetual and chronic stress or distress, right, die. We're miserable. We get sick. But when you create eustress, i.e. healthy strain or stress, just like lifting weights to build a muscle, when we can create eustress followed by deep and profound recovery, right, we have a much higher amplitude, much more productive neurophysiological cycle. And the results, just as Brad was talking about with MAPS, right, and the role that MDMA can play in that peak experience / deep release, we can now approach that and accomplish that through a host of other mechanisms. Now, what is interesting today? We are all here because these four forces are intersecting in ways they rarely have before. Technology, psychology, neurobiology, and pharmacology. And what we're seeing is many folks talked about the technologically mediated empathy we learned about this morning, right, where someone can feel Parkinson's tremors, or the UN has done VR to increase empathy of Syrian refugee camps. Right? These abilities for us to now collapse what was this experience in one domain and extend it to another is revolutionizing what we can do and how we can accelerate our learning. To take another example, Imperial College of London, they gave MDMA and psilocybin to subjects, put them in an fMRI machine, so you have pharmacology combined with technology, and in a 3-year study flat, right, they revolutionized our concepts of mind, i.e. the concept of self as a network, what happens in non-ordinary states and cross-hemispheric communication. So what had been the domain of philosophers, psychology, right, they unlocked by combining technology and pharmacology. So as much as these things are accidentally happening, we're taking a step with the Flow Genome Project to actually create research and training centers. And in fact, Dr. Jan Venter is here in the audience, along with one of Canada's leading neuroscientists, Dr. Ryan Darcy, and we are putting together a research and training facility up in Vancouver and also in Whistler. And the idea is to combine peak performance training with world-class measurements. And I was just speaking with Peter yesterday, and pleased to announce from the stage today that we're going to be launching a Hero X Prize for Flow. And the intention there is to be seeding not just allopathic disease-based solutions, but what is possible on the optimal side of human performance. And as we gather that data and as we share it with the world, how can we start creating integrated tools and technologies that can lead more people into their optimal zone of flourishing? Because ultimately, I mean, Cirque du Soleil just blew up the world of circus. They said, no more roasted peanuts and no more elephants and tigers. Let's give people what they really want. And from a $4 trillion market, we would love to be able to create not just $1 billion opportunity, but touching 1 billion lives. And so I want to leave you with that. This is the question. The agony of being human, we never get to duck. But by experiencing ecstasis, by experiencing these moments of wholeness and fullness, it can give us the inspiration, the motivation, it can mend our trauma, it can heighten our collaboration, and it can give us at least a shot at pulling this off. So as the Talmud says, which, and I heard this at a graduation speech once, and it's never left me, is that in the old Jewish text, it says, we are not expected to finish this work, but nor are we excused from it. Thank you very much.
So your work and those of your colleagues are really touching a lot of worlds. Just down the street in Coronado, we have the Navy SEALs, and they've been using flow state in that realm. What might be sort of 1 or 2 easy things that folks can do to start getting into this realm without jumping full in?
I mean, the simplest is just respiratory awareness. So paying attention to breath and learning that different states, rates, and rhythms of breathing is the single biggest impact on states of consciousness. So breathe, damn it.
Okay. With that, deep breath. Thank you, Jamie.